Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to our session. I'm going to turn on my camera for intros. Hi, welcome to the SID Specialty Classes and Student Tag session. I am Jenny Schlickebeer and my co-host is
Mary Zimmerly. Hello, everyone. I heard you call this the Sid Show today, so I'm expecting greatness.
oh boy, it's kind of what it is.
Yeah,
Okay,
great to see you
well,
all.
good to see everyone. Thanks for coming. We're going to turn off our cameras and just roll along here. Yes, so welcome to the session. This is something we haven't done a specific session on this topic before, so let's take a look at the agenda. What we wanted to highlight today are what we're calling specialty classes and student tags. So for the purposes of this session, what we wanted to look at is the type of classes that require either sort of unique tags associated with the class or maybe even unique naming conventions, specifically because they might have unique reporting requirements, or in some cases, because students in those classes are then eligible for certain MSGs. So we do cover this briefly in most of our data cleanup sessions and our end of the year session, but we felt it was a good idea to sort of highlight this particular issue. So we're going to look over the types of classes we're talking about are the Integrated Education Training, IET, Workplace Literacy, Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education, IELCE, Distance Learning, and TVM Teacher Verification Model. Now we're going to go into a little bit quick descriptions of what those classes are, but we mainly are going to focus on how you make sure you have tagged those correctly and why you need to tag them correctly. And we're also going to cover a few student tags that are similar. If you tag students with these, it's for particular reasons that affect certain types of reporting and things. So that's what we'll cover today. And the slides, Mary just put a link into a PDF version of the slides into the chat, so you can take a look at that. So we're going to start with specialty classes. So the first type of class we want to cover today is called Integrated Education and Training, otherwise known as IET. There's kind of a long wall of words here. I'm just going to read it. This is sort of the brief description. It's not super thorough, but the brief description is that IET is a service approach that provides adult education and literacy activities concurrently and contextually with workforce preparation activities and workforce training for a specific occupation or occupational cluster for the purpose of educational and career advancement. And then it has that nice little code, which I think comes from the Federal Register. And their IET classes have required elements. They must have ABE instruction, workforce prep, and workforce training that have to be delivered concurrently and collaboratively. So those words come up a lot, concurrently and collaboratively. So one other outstanding feature of IET classes is if you are going to be running IET classes, you do have to get, and you're going to tag them as such, you do have to get required approval from the MDE staff, Minnesota Department of Ed. And we have a link on this slide that goes to the page on their website that has the approval form. Okay, so that is a brief description of what IET is. I know we have programs around the state, a handful, maybe more than a handful, that do run IET programs. Maybe people can chime in on the chat real quick if you have IET programming to say, yep, we have it, or something like that. So we have a sense of if we have any IET folks here today. Okay. Rochester does. Nice. Metro South, Central. Yep, we got a handful. Great. So what is special about IET? Why is it important that we're drawing attention to these type of classes, and why is it important to tag them properly? Well, probably one of the most relevant for you as a program is that the IET students are now able to obtain measurable skill gains, which we call MSGs, which are similar to level gains, in 3 new categories that were introduced last year, and they are only eligible for IET students and in one situation, workplace students, which we'll get to in a moment. But the new MSGs, number 3, which is about getting post-secondary credits on a transcript, number 4, which is milestones, number 5, which is occupational exam, which in SID we refer to as credentials. So when you run your level gain report, which is the picture here, these 3 shaded columns are those new MSGs, 3, 4, and 5. And students who are in IET classes are eligible for those MSGs. Other students are not. So that's why it's very important that you label your IET classes correctly. Something else we added to this report, this level gain report, to the right are these columns that are mostly in gray. We have we have a little highlighted note here that's not on the actual report. That points, we like to pull out the students who you have in your system who are tagged as IET or workplace and who have those various, who have the credential, et cetera. So you can kind of double check. So we're giving you a double check option there. But more importantly are the 3 MSGs. So if you have students in IET and they met one of these items, then they're going to show up on your level gain report as getting a gain, MSG. Now that's kind of a brief summary of those 3 MSGs, but we also have a link here in the slide that brings you to the help article about MSGs 3, 4, and 5. And I think from that link, that goes to our help article. And in there is another link that goes to the policy statement, or the, what is it called? The assistance document from Department of Ed, MDE, Brad and their department, about a little more detail about those MSGs number 3, 4, and 5. Another reason it's important to tag your IET classes correctly is because when MDE submits their ABE data for federal reporting, students who are enrolled in these properly tagged IETs will be reported as IET students. Okay, so it's important to tag the classes properly so that the students in the classes get listed as IET for your reporting and for states reporting to the federal reporting. So to make sure you're doing it correctly, you have to just properly tag the class. So for IET, here's a screenshot of the class creation screen. And this screen is very similar to a class edit screen. So if you ever need to go in and edit a class that already exists, it's going to look very similar to this. So there's 2 requirements that we have for IET. One is in the class name. We suggest that you include IET in the title of the class. So that's pretty simple. And then as you're entering your class, your hours and the dates the class meets, et cetera, very close to the bottom of the screen, there is this class instructional modes section. And the first option is integrated education and training program. And you should select yes for these types of classes. And there's a little reminder in the wording there that this has to be approved by MDE. And then of course, click save. So that's really all you have to do. It's pretty simple. We wanted to draw your attention to it because also you might accidentally label a class IET that shouldn't be labeled as such. And if you ever realize that has happened, you can always come to this screen, to the class edit screen, and change it from yes to no and save again, and you can untag it. So it's just primarily this one simple tag. And we do have a link here on the slide for our help article about IET classes, or setting up IET classes in SiD. And as a reminder, Mary is putting all the links in the chat. So that's labeling the class correctly. And we have one other element about IET classes that I wanted to highlight that is something I haven't emphasized before. But if you have students who have enrolled in your IET classes, but they never attended, we would like to make sure that you actually, when you drop or exit those students, that you give them the removed status. And that's going to help make sure they don't accidentally appear on your level gain report. We only want students who actually attended the class. So you and your students should be familiar with this screen. This is what the screen looks like when you're exiting students. So if you're in your regular class screen, you go to that Enroll Exit button, and then a screen that's pretty blank appears and you tell it you want to exit students. And there's always different options that you can put, either the class ended or the student completed or whatever. And then removed is one of those options. We only want you to put that for students who never attended. Now, when you're looking at the screen, it's pretty easy to determine which student has not attended, because your list of students who are in the class, it'll show their enrollment date, and it will show their most recent date of attendance, and it will say none if they never attended. So when you're dropping students, make sure you click those nones first and select remove for them. And then everyone else, you give what you normally give, whether that's class completed or class ended. That's something new I wanted to highlight, and that's going to be true also for workplace literacy. Okay, any quick questions about IET? Brenda asked if that is just IET or all classes. It's very important for IET and workplace. All the other classes in your system, it's not as important because I use that removed to help pull the correct people onto the level gain report. Otherwise, it's mostly for your own information. So I know some programs are pretty diligent about putting whether a student completed or did not complete classes, and removed hasn't been as important, but definitely for IET and workplace literacy. Thank you. It's a good question. If they attended, that's fine. Then you should put did not complete or withdrew or dropped, whatever you as a program, whatever wording you want to use. That was Kim's question about if the student did attend but didn't complete, then please don't use removed, use one of those other options. Great. All right, let's move on to workplace. So for workplace literacy, again, I have kind of a wall of words here. I'm going to just read the sort of quick and easy definition for this kind of programming. So this is going to be activities offered by an eligible ABE provider in collaboration with an employer or employee organization at the workplace or other offsite location. And these activities are designed to improve the productivity of the workforce. And again, we have a link here for more information on the MDE workplace literacy. It's a programming brief that they have on their website, on the MDE's website. And I know we also have a number of programs around the state that have this type of programming. If people want to chime in again, because it's kind of fun to see who's out there doing this type of programming, who's got workplace literacy. So I know we have some that are, I think we have a programming at Windows and Anderson Windows. I don't know. When I was scrolling through, I saw a few workplaces. Becca Bear does. Awesome. I think, I know somewhere well, I think Hubs has some like at the airport. Metro North has some at Cummins. Great. So this is a great type of programming. And we want to make sure that if you're offering that programming, your students are in it, that you're tagging them correctly as well. And why? What's so special about workplace literacy students? Well, again, students in workplace literacy programming are eligible for one of those new MSGs. Now, unlike IET, IET students were eligible for all three of the new ones, MSG 3, 4, and 5. But workplace literacy students are eligible for MSG number 4, which is the milestone one. And if you want more information about the milestones, you can go that link from a few slides ago about MSG 3, 4, and 5. There's a bit more information there. So in addition to you being able to obtain some level gains or MSGs with students who are in workplace literacy, the MDE also submits their ABE data for federal reporting, and students who are in workplace literacy do get counted up and reported as being workplace literacy. So it's important to tag your classes correctly so all these students and classes are reported accurately for various reporting, including for your own benefit for level gains. Oh, cool. Becca, looks like you're working on even a third partnership. That's great. So to make sure your class is tagged correctly, it's just very similar to IET. It's just a different toggle. And there's fewer requirements. We don't have any naming conventions for workplace literacy, so name it something that is clear and makes sense to you. When I have looked at lists of classes, it is nice to see kind of the name of where the work is happening, because it's kind of interesting to me to see, oh, cool, where some of our AB classes are. But then again, after you've done the name of the classroom, teacher, start times, et cetera, near the bottom of the screen is this toggle for workplace literacy, and just select yes and click save. It's very easy. And again, if you've accidentally tagged something as yes and you look on a report and you say, oh, wait, why is that class workplace literacy? I should undo that. You just come to the same edit screen and toggle it back to no and click save, and everything's fine. And like the IET programming, we do ask that you remove students who haven't attended. Okay, so the same sort of process as with IET. For all your other students, select the option that makes the most sense. Did the class end? Did the class complete? Or I'm sorry, is the student leaving because they completed? Did they not complete, et cetera? You have a few options, and I think programs use those, have some conventions within their own program about which wording they use. But for students who did not attend, again, look at the screen. It will say that they don't have any attendance, and you select remove for those students. And again, for that's IET and workplace. Okay, any questions about workplace tags of the classes? All right. And we will keep moving forward. The next type of specialty class we wanted to highlight is Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education, IELCE. I always have to say that very slow because I trip over my words. The definition of this type of class is integrated English literacy and civics education classes are those funded by an IELCE grant that provide instruction on English language literacy, civics, and workforce skills. So as I like to say about this type of programming, if you have it, you know you have it because you've been getting funding for it. So again, maybe we can have a few shout outs from programs that have IELCE programming. We must have some with us today. I think Julie said there's 12 providers around the state who are doing this type of programming. And again, we have a link here for more information about IELCE programming. Becca, again, very nice. Love it. Okay, and what is special about IELCE? Why is it important to tag these classes properly? Well, in the case of IELCE, they aren't specific MSGs for this, but you are required to fill out specific types of reporting. Great, thank you, Linda. Metro North also has IELCE. So there's specific reporting, I think both interim and annual reporting that you have to send MDE. And on the right of this screen here, we have sort of a sample screenshot of what a typical report has looked. One of the, I think it was last year's or the year before. It's going to ask you just sort of the basics about your programming, including the count of enrollees and participants. Okay, so we'll get to that in a second. In addition to you having to report to the state, since you are a fund, since you have received funds, the state also does report counts of IEL students when they do their reporting to the feds. So in order to make sure that you, when you're running your reports for your requested annual or interim reporting, it's going to ask you it does ask you for how many students have level gains or I think even a copy of your level gain report. And we have a screenshot right here of the top of the level gain report where all the toggles are. And if you have labeled your classes correctly, what you do is you're going to select the funding source, IELCE, when you run your report, and it's going to run the report for those classes. Okay. And this one is also quite simple for setting up. There are no naming convention requirements. And then as you're adding all your info about your class, scroll not quite as all the way down the screen as the previous examples. There is this toggle for funding source type, and IELCE is right there. So click that, and of course, click Save. And again, you can always go back and edit it if you've incorrectly labeled something. But it's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. And again, we have a help article for that. Mary and I were talking about how on this session, we seem to have a link for either a help article or documentation on almost every single slide. So sorry to overwhelm, but there's a lot of content here today. Okay, any questions? We don't have any specific requirements of when you drop students. I mean, I wouldn't mind if programs always use remove for students who don't have hours, but that's not required. That's particularly important for IET and workplace. Okay. We wanted to make sure to mention distance learning, even though I think distance learning has been around a long time, and pretty much, I would say probably all programs have distance learning programming at their site. So hopefully you're all familiar with that. And the reporting requirements aren't quite as they're not going to affect level gains, and they're not going to affect your particular program funding like the previous ones, but they do affect how students are reported for yourself and for the Fed. So we want to make sure everything's labeled correctly, and it's also good for the state to be looking at what kind of programming is going on. So we want to make sure the DL classes are labeled correctly. So as you know, distance learning, proxy hours refer to the time that a student spends working independently to complete their distance learning lessons. And the distance learning lessons have to be on a approved distance learning curriculum platform, such as MobyMax, Edmentum, Burlington. I think those are the popular ones that I see often. So those curriculum, those are the DL platforms that students work on their own, and then you collect from those software systems, you collect how many hours, proxy hours they've earned, and then you're tracking those proxy hours. And of course, you should not mix your proxy hours with either online instruction time in the same class if you're doing some kind of combo, or if your students are in person in class and then also doing distance learning, you should not mix those hours. The proxy hours always have to be in their own type of class. Oh, somebody just highlighted something. This is a good point. I wonder if this is something we have to look into. Cindy said, for programs letting teachers add students to Edmentum, please make sure they are filtering to your specific program so they don't end up in everyone's programs. I'm not sure what that means. Does that refer to students who are shared between different ABE programs? They might be doing Edmentum and if they're a student at a couple different sites, both sites might see those hours. Is that what you're referring to, Cindy? If so, that seems like something we should probably discuss with probably the DL committee. Thank you. No, if they don't select their site. Okay, that's not a SID issue. Sounds like it's a software issue with the software, but it would be important for us to know if there might be something that could happen where a student who's attending two ABE programs is doing Edmentum at one and not at the other, and we don't want both programs to accidentally be putting in their hours. Something for me to just keep in mind. Thank you. Okay, so what's special about distance learning students and where do they get reported? Why do we need to track them particularly? Um, so for federal reporting, so this is not something that you necessarily see, but the Minnesota Department of Ed, they report something very similar to the level gain MSG table, which they report, which is called Table 4. They report level gains for all students. Then they have another report that's very similar, and it's called 4C, which is just like our level gain MSG post-test rates, but it's just for distance learning students, or they call them distance education students. So, and for that report that MDE has to send to the feds, for federal reporting, they consider anybody to be a distance education student if 50% or more of their hours come from DL. Okay, so if you have to be tagging your classes properly so that those DL hours are considered DL hours, then the reporting that MDE does for federal reporting can determine if that student has more than 50% of their hours come from proxy/DL hours. Okay, that's what the state has to report. That's not what you're looking at on this screen, but that's what the state has to report. But in addition to that, we offer a report in SID. It's very similar to the level gains report, and we call it very creatively level gains, MSGs, and post-test rates for distance learning. And that is a report, like I said, it looks very much like the level gain report, but we have a couple extra toggles, or actually you type in numbers into these fields. So you can run this report just for a specific set of students who have DL hours. I think it defaults to this 1 to 100%. So it's going to look for students who have DL hours where DL hours make up somewhere between 1 and 100% of all their hours. So that's going to be all your students who have at least any kind of DL hour. They're going to show up if you run it with this default. But if you only want to run students who have 50% or more of their hours are DL, then you could type in 50 here up to 100, and it's going to run the report for students who are 50% or more DL. So sometimes programs like to look at, oh, how are my students who are mostly doing DL? How are they doing? How are my students who only have a little bit of DL, but so say you want to run it from students who have 1 to 30% of their hours are DL. That means they're attending more than they're doing DL. So maybe DL is sort of supplementing. And you can run that report and see if that compares to how your overall student body is doing. So that's more for your own use to kind of analyze how DL is going for your program. But that won't work unless you tag your classes correctly. Let's take a look at how we tag those classes. So For DL classes where you are counting their proxy hours, as you can see, this screen has a few more red boxes. So there's a few more things you have to pay attention to. First and foremost, the class name. We ask for the naming convention to include the name of the DL curriculum that you're using. So for example, Moby Max. And then also use the word proxy. And the word proxy really kind of helps you as a program eyeball your class list and see, okay, these are the ones where I'm throwing in my proxy hours. Then you're going to put in the teacher name, etc. And then partially down the screen is the attendance format. If you want to collect, most proxy programs collect the proxy hours and enter them about once a month. So you might have students who have like 15 hours or 20 hours. So we suggest you take attendance in the quote unquote lab style attendance rather than scheduled. Because lab style, you put in a chunk of hours. So you're going to type in 15 or 10 or whatever the number of hours the student attended. So it's much more flexible for taking proxy hour attendance. The next question is student hour type, which defaults to contact, but this is very important. This is what's going to make sure your students are reported on the right tables with the right amount of distance learning hours, is you need to select distance learning as the student hour type, distance learning. And then finally, a little bit further down the screen is the distance learning program. And that's where you're going to have there's a drop-down list of all the different distance learning platforms. So Burlington, Edmentum, there's some GED ones, etc. They'll be on the drop-down. And that's going to help you, if you need to, as a program, look and see which of your DL programs get the most sort of action. And again, we have a help article listed here. And Mary put these in the chat. And again, just a reminder that we make these slides available and the PDF. I believe the PDF has live links in it. Is that right, Mary? So all these links will be elsewhere as well after the fact. Yes, PDF has live links. Okay. Then I also wanted to highlight one particular type of distance learning class, which is called Teacher Verified Model. And this was a new variation that was added to ABE programming a couple years ago. And this is a way for Minnesota ABE programs to count their proxy hours for asynchronous lessons that aren't part of an approved DL platform. But those lessons have to be developed by local staff that are certified to use this model, this teacher verified model. And that is key because it's pretty rigorous certification process, I would say. And because of that, since it's not a DL platform, but it is a certified teacher verified model, we need you to create separate classes for each TVM certified teacher, kind of like you create a separate class for each DL platform. And so if a teacher is using TVM lessons for more than one class, you're going to want to separate those as well. And like regular DL, you don't want to mix your proxy hour classes because these are very much the same as proxy hours. You're giving students attendance for lessons they've completed. So you don't want to mix that in with your either online instruction time, live face-to-face, or your in-person instruction time. Now this one we linked to, there's a Literacy Minnesota article on their website about this whole type of programming. And I want to reiterate again that it requires teachers to get certified in this process. And it's a fairly rigorous process. There's online class, and then there's other steps to take before you can offer this type of programming. And what is special about it? Again, we keep highlighting that TVM does require special training for teachers. And then we have a special, you've probably seen this when you look at your class list on the left where you get your printable attendance sheets, there's one for TVM attendance log. Because if you have a class that you're offering these TVM lessons in, you have a special way of taking attendance, of logging down which lessons were completed, what date they were completed, and then you kind of add it all up before you put it in as proxy hours. So unlike the DL platforms, like Edmentum or whatever, those programs, you download a list from that software and it tells you how many hours the student earned. This one, since it's teacher created, the teacher has to determine how many hours the student earned based on how many lessons they completed. So there's some work involved for the teacher to track all that. So um, to document all that. And then this type of programming is audited regularly. I think maybe quarterly. The DL committee and MDE staff do take a look over, look kind of oversight around the state, which programs are doing TVM and if staff have been properly trained, et cetera. So similar to DL, TVM has a few more items that you have to make sure you have tagged correctly and named correctly on your class setup screen. So first of all, we ask that you use the word TVM in the name of the class and the word proxy, similar to other distance learning proxy classes. Again, for the attendance format, you're going to select lab for the same reason, because you're putting in chunks of hours, basically. For the student type, you're selecting distance learning. Again, this is the field that helps the reports generate and figure out which students have distance learning hours compared to all their other types of hours. And then under the distance learning program, so with regular quote unquote distance learning classes, we have this list of all the various platforms on here. Well, within this list, alphabetized, we also have teacher verified DL lessons, parentheses, TVM. So that's what you should select if you're offering the TVM type classes. Now for this graphic, we showed you that we have a couple other distance learning platforms that start with the word teacher. So it is kind of easy to accidentally select the wrong one. So just make sure if you're doing TVM, you select TVM specifically. There are such items as teacher created course, which is a different thing. Sounds similar, but it's slightly different. Those are courses that a whole course was approved by the state to be allowed for distance learning as a distance learning platform. Okay. And again, a link. Any questions about all that before I go into where you can look to see all your classes and how they are labeled, et cetera? All right, I'm going to keep moving along. So one thing we wanted to make sure to highlight is something, again, that we mentioned at the end of the year program or session and data cleanup sessions is that we have ways that you can look at your own lists of programmings to double check that things look the way they should look, are labeled the way they should be labeled, et cetera. And so one of those items is a report that is called the Class Information Report. And we also have a desk audit report. So we're going to take a look first at the class information report. So if you go to the SiD reports tab and you scroll pretty far down, I think, there's a report called class information. And this looks like this. And in fact, it's very wide. It goes further to the right with more columns that are listing the various content areas of classes. But what I want to draw your attention to today is that we have columns here showing you whether your classes have some of these tags that we've just gone over. So we do have a columns. These two have been there for a long time. This DL program. So if you have selected a DL program platform, it's going to list that here. So you can eyeball which ones have been listed. You can see if you have any TVMs or not. And then if it's an IET, it'll say IET. If it's workplace lit, you'll have workplace lit, IELC, etc. Those are not highlighted on the report. You have to eyeball them yourself. And I also want to point out that I just updated this report the other day. And so we have a second page now, which I've called the simplified page, because this report kind of nests subsites within sites and then classes within subsites. It's hard for you to export it and sort it if you want to sort it in other ways. So now if you run this report, this update just went in last week, you can go to the second page and it's much more simplified. Everything is just straight across. It's not nested in this way. So it'll just say sandbox subsite on each. You'll take a look. And then if you do export it to Excel, you can you can sort the ways you want to. It'll be on the second sheet. And in fact, on the SiD one, there are a few toggles at the top of the different columns. So we'll take a look at the end. I think we'll have a little bit of time to do some practice and activity. And another place where you can look specifically for IET, Workplace Lit, and IELCE classes is on the desk audit. Okay, so this is a screenshot of the desk audit, page 3. And this only lists classes that are either IET in this section, IELCE in this section, and workplace literacy. So this is good for 2 reasons. One, look at this report, and normally it defaults to the date range of the program. So it's going to show you any class that was active sometime during that date range. So even if you just had a summer class that is now done, it's going to be on here. And it's going to be on here if it's labeled as IET based on the toggle when you created the class, the tag. Not the class name, but the toggle. Okay. Same with IELCE and workplace. So you can look at these and say, okay, are all my IET classes here? Is everything labeled properly? You can also look here and see, wait a minute, why is this class here? This shouldn't be in workplace. I better go edit that and untoggle it. Okay, so it's dual purpose. All right, let's look at some specialty student tags. We're only just highlighting 2 today because they're pretty unique. I don't think we have tons of students with these around the state, but they pop up and it's good for just to draw special attention to them. Like I said, I talk about them at the year end and data cleanup, but we usually brush over them very quickly. So one is the non-NRS history item. So this is a history item that you can assign to a student if that, or yeah, I guess a student when they are not eligible for ABE services. And so you're going to put this on their history item. Okay. So examples of that are some programs have programming where they work with some under 21 students, sort of in a partnership with their K-12, and they want to put those students in their class so they can take attendance easily for them, but they don't want to report them because those are not eligible students for reporting. So not because they're under 21, but because they're still in their K-12. So they're going to tag that student as non-NRS. Or we have programs that actually have daycare with little kids, and so but they want to take attendance for them in the same system they're taking attendance for parents. So they put those students in, but they mark them all as non-NRS. And then in the past, like years ago, we had concerns about students who were here on student visas. They were considered not eligible in the past. So sometimes this non-NRS history item was assigned to those types of students. And the reason I bring that up is because if a student was given this history item a long time ago and it was never given an end date, it'll still be active. So one of the key things about non-NRS that I want to highlight today is that you need to end date people who are no longer non-NRS. Otherwise, they are being pulled off your reports and you're not going to be getting hours for them, etc. Okay. So they will not be counted on table A or NRS tables if they have an active non-NRS tag. And then Becca did point out that that would have been a good type of class to maybe highlight is your workaround to also making sure you don't have to remember to turn off students is creating classes that are non-NRS. So if you remembered in the class student hour type, you can put a non-NRS student hour type, and those hours are also not reported. So that's a good way to exclude people from reporting, Becca. Okay, and another important thing about the non-NRS tag, it is effective for the entire contact or NRS program year. So you can't just halfway through the year decide a student is no longer non-NRS, because even if you give it an end date in the middle of the year and your student continues to attend, SiD considers them non-NRS for the whole program year. So you have to kind of strategically turn people off. So if they really are no longer considered non-NRS, you give them an end date, and we'll talk about that in a couple screens. Also, this tag is person specific, but not site specific, meaning if you share this student with another program, they're going to appear as non-NRS in that other program too. And so we have had programs run a report and see somebody tagged as non-NRS, and they're like, why is that? Oh, they were tagged non-NRS a couple years ago with this other program. And then sometimes we have to get them to talk to each other, and then the other program will say, oh yeah, you don't have to worry about that anymore. You can end date it or whatever. So sometimes it takes a little bit of communication between programs. So to add a non-NRS history item to a student, you go to the student history page, and you should hopefully be familiar with this top of the student history page screen. You set the effective date. So that's going to, if it's a new student, it's going to be their entry date. And then from the history group, you select program, NRS. From the history item, select non-NRS. From optional status, you, in my opinion, just leave that blank, but you could put set or start. And then comments are also optional, but you could write a sentence or a phrase or two about why the student was given the tag. I personally hope that everyone starts using that because sometimes when we're trying to help people sort out whether something a student really is non-NRS or not, it's really helpful to have a little information there. And again, a link to a help article. Now here's the kind of more tricky thing is ending non-NRS history items. So if you run your desk audit, which we'll show you in a moment how to find these students, and you see some people who are non-NRS but shouldn't be, so maybe that, like I said, they were given this tag a while ago, or they were given the tag by accident for whatever reason. If they were a non-NRS in the past, but they no longer are, then you should end their non-NRS history item with the effective date or the end date. You have to give them an end date of their non-NRS history item. Give that to them as the most accurate end date. So when they stop being a non-NRS, give them an end date then. And if the student is shared, that shared program can give the end date, even if you were the one who put the non-history item in. Now here's where it gets tricky. You need to determine whether you want to edit by giving the end date to the student, or if you want to remove that history item so that it's just gone. All right, so that's a remove. We use the word remove on history items. That's basically like deleting that history item. So over here in this little green box, we highlight kind of the difference. So if the student stopped being non-NRS last program year, so, and we have 2 program years, and it kind of does matter if you're talking about the state year or the federal year, because the state year affects your funding for hours, and the federal year affects whether they're going to be on reports. If they stop being a non-NRS last year sometime, give that end date. You can do that now. Give the end date to that history item. Now, if you created the non-NRS item this year, and then you realize, oh, that's not right. They aren't non-NRS. And you gave them the effective this year, this current program year from July 1st until now, that in that case, you can delete because it's almost like a mistake or, oh, they aren't really non-NRS. You can remove it. Sorry, I said delete. The wording on the history item edit is remove. Okay. If you have any questions about that, because dates can be a little tricky, definitely email us and we can help you determine what is the right end date to give that NRS status, I'm sorry, non-NRS status, or whether you can just remove. Doesn't happen a lot, so we're happy to help solve that puzzle with you. And our email, you should all know our email, but it's also at the end. Okay, and this is gonna be very similar to our next items. Let's talk about that and then we can talk about both types. Okay, conditional work referral. Woo! Talk about a page of words, huh? So conditional work referral is also a history item that you tag onto a student's record. So MDE allows special programming for students working on digital literacy or soft skills that are necessary for work. But if these students do not need to improve their core literacy, or that's not what they're there for, if they're there specifically for the work skills. Students have to be referred in writing by either career force staff or an employment and job counselors. These types of students, CWR students, can earn up to 30 hours per program year and still be considered CWR. Here's why it's relevant for reporting and putting stuff in SiD is because pre-testing is not required for true CWR students. We do strongly encourage it, recommend it. I would say just do it because a lot of those students, once they're in some of your programming, then many of them do continue then and do some reading or math or whatever, and then you'll have your pretest ready for them. So, but because they aren't required during those 30 hours, since they're CWR, to have a test, that 12-hour block on attendance won't go into effect for these students if you have tagged them as CWR. It'll start at 30 hours instead. So, but like I mentioned, when a student moves from CWR type programming and they actually start going into your academic programming for literacy or reading or math or whatever, you will need to either end or remove their CWR history item. We'll talk about that in a slide. And oh, then you're going to want to make sure you definitely test the students who you didn't test. You're going to definitely need to give them a test if they're going to start entering your regular programming. Okay, and again, link for info. And that one I think goes to the ABE, the MDE's policy page. And on that policy page, they have a whole policy directly about CWR. Okay, very similar to adding any kind of history item. You put in the effective date for when they started. History group in this case is program state. History item is conditional work referral. Optional status, you can select something, but it doesn't do anything. And then comments. I think some programs put in who referred. So if you're getting students referred to conditional work referral from a particular workforce center or a particular job counselor, I think some programs put in the name of that job counselor, which I think is really handy. Then you know you have that referral for that student too. And ending, similar to what I was saying about non-NRS. And the best way to stay on top of this is end it when that student is no longer conditional work referral. Then you won't have to go back and think, when did they stop? When did they change, etc. Again, since this history item is relevant between programs, so if two programs share this student, they're going to appear as CWR both programs. Either one of those programs can end it. Okay, so sometimes you do have to be in communication with each other. And when a student does get a valid pretest, they will be assigned the appropriate ABE or ESL level automatically. Finally, again, determine whether you want to use the edit or remove. And what I was saying previously about non-NRS holds true for this. So if they stop being CWR last year sometime, give them an end date last year so that it doesn't affect this year's reporting. Or if the other option is if you assign them CWR this year and now you realize they aren't CWR, then you can remove it, which is similar to deleting. But never, for either of these situations, never use remove for a history item that was relevant last program year. Any program year that's been reported in any way, shape, or form, do not remove that history item. End it. And again, if you have any kind of question about whether you should edit or end or remove, contact us. We love to help with that stuff. Okay. And here's how you can check to see if you have these students, how many of them you have, and if they look to be accurate or not. So you can go to the desk audit report. It's going to default to the program year. Now, if you're out there searching to see if you have any non-NRS students who are tagged, who need to be cleaned up, you're going to have to toggle this. This defaults to no. Include this one up here at the top. Include non-NRS students. You got to toggle that so it says yes, then you're going to run it. So I think this report might run automatically once, and then so you're going to have to run it again. You have to toggle this to yes and run it again. And then you're going to look at page 2. And up here lists all the students who are CWR. You can press the plus sign and it's going to list them out for you. And down below is non-NRS students. You click the plus sign, it's going to list them out for you. If non-NRS students, if this table doesn't even appear, that means you do not have students in that category. It only appears if there's people in it. I should also point out the CWR students are also on your table A. So if you remember at the end of for the contact year reporting, you run a table A that counts all your students and all their hours. CWR is on its own row on that table as well. So that's another place for you to look for those students. But this is the only place where you can really find the non-NRS students. Well, we do have the program data export, but. Okay, any questions on either of those real quick before we do a quick activity? All right, let's do it. So activity 1 for 3 minutes, maybe even faster. I would like you all to go out and run that class information report. So you know where to go. On the SID reports tab, go to the list for students. It's the list for students and classes section. this little section. I think it's about halfway down. Click on the class information report, run that with the default settings. While you're out there, take a look at the second page on that to see kind of the simplified version, see what you think of that. You can sort on the SID before you even export on that second page. Okay, go do that and come back and report back. We'll have you report on what you've seen. Okay, winding down on our 2 minutes. It looks like we had a few folks say theirs look good. And I think that probably means that the classes that should be labeled IET are labeled IET. They were able to see it on their spreadsheet, on their report. And we got some good feedback on the second page of that report. I'm glad to hear that. We wanted to simplify that. I knew when you export some of those reports, if they're organized that way, they're very hard to sort, etc. Great. Everything's looking good for folks. Okay, let's do one more activity while we're here. This time, I want you to go run your desk audit report. So on the reports tab, under the data cleanup reports for students and classes section, the desk audit, you should all be familiar with it. Make sure you filter the non-NRS students question to yes, and then run the report. Then come on back. We'll do 2 minutes again, even though I don't think we'll quite need that time. And see if there's any surprises, any things you think you need to clean up. If you do have specific questions about specific students that you can't figure out, now's the time to highlight those names and maybe shoot us an email after this session. Right, we're getting a few first folks back saying all things are looking good. Thanks, Laura. While you're looking at the desk audit, you can look at the third page as well and see that other location where you can see your IET, IELCE, and workplace literacy classes. Anyone else? Did anybody find anything surprising? You don't have to out yourself, I guess, but you can shoot us an email after. Clean as a whistle. Nice. Love to hear that. All right. Anyone else find anything interesting? You're good to go. Okay. So just remember to do that. If anybody has a non-NRS student that they don't think should be tagged, give them an end date from previous year, or contact us if you're not sure when to end date it. All right, great. And that is the end of our session. Oh, oh no, Linda, yours is still loading. Okay, yeah. Yeah, you're a bigger program too. I did have everyone. Oh, shoot, everyone. Okay, we need to work on some optimizing then too. I want you guys to chime in a couple minutes or in a minute or so. Let me know if it finally completed. Okay, but that does bring us to the end. If there's any questions, if they are SID related questions, our email is sidsupport@mnabe.org. Valerie's finally completed. I hope yours was clean as a whistle too. If you have specific questions about the programming, sort of the rules about what classes count as IET or what sort of curriculum is for IET, IELCE workplace, you can contact Julie. Okay, thanks everyone commenting on that your report has completed. So again, email us with any questions, email Julie with any specific questions about the programming. And then we also have down here, wanted to remind you, save the date. Our end of the year data cleanup webinar is scheduled for April 30th, 2024. I think we saved sending out an email about that. We are waiting until we are done with this session before we send out that email. So keep your eyes open for an email on that. Oh, we have a question from Julie. Did you want to unmute or did you want to type in your question?
Hey, Jenny, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Just a quick note on another SID thing, and this isn't related to anything that you shared today, but
okay.
was there an update on how reports print out? Do you know what I mean? As far as like, I'll open a report and now the screen looks a little different.
Yeah, we did. We had an update to the server. So I wasn't sure. I mean, I can see visually looking at it that the top part of a report where the toggles are, I know that looks a little different, but I guess I'm not sure how that affected the printing.
Okay, so that's what I was wondering, if it was just on our end or if something was changed. So all good.
Okay, good.
I noticed we have a typo on this page. That is not our SID support request email.
Oh,
Of all the things, 36 slides. Our email address is SiDSupport at literacymn.org. Sorry about that. How did that get by us? Can you believe it?
wow. Literacymn.org,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
which I always have to remind myself what is
Yeah.
our actual.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry,
sorry.
guys.
I saw you turn on your camera and I was like, well, that is interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
she doesn't usually do that.
Julie says, no worries, we will track you down. Good, good. We actually like to hear that. Quick question. Can the Canvas platform be added on the class setup for distance learning program dropdown as an option? Um, Cindy, I'm not quite sure about that platform. That would be a question for the distance learning committee. When the distance learning committee approves certain software to be used for DL programs, they let us know and then we put it on the drop down. So I'm not sure if anybody on this meeting happens to have any inside scoop about the Canvas, whether that is teacher created, I'm not sure. Um, but if it's the normal process for making to get names listed on that drop down is that the DL committee has to let me know. And you can get their info. And I think that the teacher created lessons also have to be approved at some point. So, okay, sounds like you're on the right page at this point. Great. All right, thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. And I think
Wait
we'll
a
probably
second, I
see you
got a
April
question.
30th. Oh, we got another question. Yep, I'm still hanging around.
Yeah, the question was in the chat, but you missed it.
Oh,
All
sorry.
right, so I got one that went to Literacy Minnesota on 12/5. They
Okay.
put CWR, and then they came to us on 12/6.
Oh,
So
okay.
what do I put for end date?
So they are not going to be CWR, right? So that should be removed, which I
Okay,
think with a
easy
shared,
peasy.
yeah, with a shared student with CWR, I think you are able to remove it. Let's see. You can remove it even though the other program put it.
Okay,
So you can just remove it. Yeah, because you
let
don't want
me,
them, if they're going to be in a regular program, you don't want that CWR tag
they
to be
have
lingering.
been.
Yeah.
Jenny, this is Jessica Cass. I've got a quick question for you too.
Awesome.
And so this is a little bit different, but it is SID related.
Okay.
So with attendance, when, we're out in college classes and doing attendance for, not lab time, class time,
Uh-huh.
what are the requirements for our attendance? Because I've heard several different things. Yes, it always goes into SID, but I'm asking prior to SID, are we required to have two documentations with a signature from the student and the time in and time out, or one documentation and then SID is the second one? I've just heard different answers and I wasn't sure if somebody could clarify for me.
Attendance is what's in SID is what is required. So I'm not sure what you mean by before
So
SID.
prior to SID, so because we have paper and pencil where the students
Okay.
sign their name.
Oh, okay. So if you have like a sign-in sheet, the teacher can take that sign-in sheet. They use that to put the attendance in. They do
And then
not
they
need
give it to our secretary who then puts the information into SID.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it is not required that you hold on to those attendance sign-in sheets.
What?
Correct. Once it's in SID, that's good, but that's from the state level. But if your program wants to hold it, like I think some programs keep that because they then occasionally do spot checks of attendance or whatever, or if your program feels more comfortable keeping those on
So I
file.
was told many years ago that I had to have two of those copies and then put it into SID. So our poor students sign in two times, and I wanted to see if we could
No.
practice.
I've never heard of a student needing to sign in twice to the same class.
Yes.
No.
We have to have two copies of it and then SID as well. And it just seems so redundant.
Yes, that's redundant. So no, you do not need that for as far as our purposes are concerned. So if your program has their own requirements, like maybe they keep a copy somewhere and then a second copy somewhere, and then they also put it in SID. So you should talk to your program about that.
I will. Yep.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we got a suggestion here. Cindy, we probably got that written down. Anything else? You know what, maybe I should stop the recording while I'm at it.